Hello, and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group bi-weekly call. Still haven't remembered to fix that slide. This is October 27th, 2016. I'm Patrick Rogers, and I'm joined by Vesa Juvonen, and we've got a great agenda here for you today. Return to presenters, or take over as presenter. Technical difficulties, we'll cut this part out. I got stuck in that having a private view of the slides. Oops. All right, so now we should all be on the second slide. So what is the JavaScript Special Interest Group all about? So we are part of the larger, what's now SharePoint Patterns and Practices program, and we did that rebranding a few months ago to really highlight our focus on SharePoint, which lives inside the larger Office 365 environment, but is a little bit more specialized. So I wanted to highlight that. And the purpose of this bi-weekly call is to have an open discussion and get latest updates around the SharePoint framework and the associated client-side development patterns, ideas from folks, feedback from folks, find out what's happening in the world, and then also talk about the Patterns and Practices JavaScript core component, which folks who've been joining the call are familiar with and is not required at all to use within the SharePoint framework, but the goal is, just like the CSOM core component, to really help make developers' lives easier and provide a little bit simpler way to get things done. So sort of a complementary effort to the SharePoint framework and ongoing development in that space. We've got two links there at the bottom. The first, the SharePoint PnP community link, goes to the Microsoft Tech community, and that's sort of our Yammer replacement. So that's a great place to ask questions, sort of get feedback, things like that, provide feedback. And then dev.office.com/SharePoint is your landing page now for all things SharePoint development. So whether it's SharePoint framework or other SharePoint development, that is a great place to get started. If you haven't started with the SharePoint framework developer preview, there's great walkthroughs and step-by-step instructions there that will walk you through setting up your developer tenant if you need one, as well as how to set up all the tools and get started. And for those of you that have been with us since the beginning, it's all very familiar to you in terms of setting up sort of the web stack tools and things like that. But great walkthroughs there, great resource if you're new to the SharePoint framework stuff. So what are we going to talk about this week? We'll talk about our updates from the SharePoint framework, what's landing most recently. We've got some updates around the JavaScript core component. We've got two great demos. The first from Chax showing the very simple to-do sample and really showing some React patterns and the importance of those and how those work within that SharePoint framework web part. So for those of you that are familiar with React, but maybe not the SharePoint framework, this will be a great walkthrough, and we're going to be working on producing more of these kind of things in terms of getting folks into the SharePoint framework and learning how to do it. For example, like I said, you might already know React, but now how do I apply that knowledge to the SharePoint framework? And we've got another great demo from Vesa and Gary around the bot framework, and that's using the Microsoft bot framework, again, within the context of the SharePoint framework. So really cool application, really showing what you can do within the SharePoint framework and what, sort of some of the different possibilities. Again, like I said, the great thing about these demos and why we try and pull in folks from the community is everybody has different ideas. So this is a really cool thing to see with the bot framework and then the SharePoint framework working together. And then at the end, we'll have time for open discussion, questions, comments, direct feedback, opportunity to give us feedback and ideas in that time. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Vesa to give us the update on the latest SharePoint framework news.
Let me unmute myself, which always helps. I'm going to take over the presentation. So a few things around the SharePoint framework. So let's actually go through a few slides around this one. So first of all, last time we had the call 2 weeks ago, we promised that the drop number 5 is going to be alive pretty soon, and it unfortunately was slightly delayed. So original plan was to get it done out on that Thursday. but then we got it out, I think, on weekend that week. So the new drop number 5 is available, and really the key change within the SharePoint framework drop 5 is that it's actually using TypeScript 2.0, and with few additional changes included. We do have a release notes available, so if you have built anything around the SharePoint framework, those release notes are telling how to upgrade to the latest version, what do you need to do within your existing projects and all of that. A few kind of a random topics on that one. So obviously we are heading, there's a small issue with the animation, so let me actually do that. So drop number 5 was released, like mentioned, a few weeks or 1.5 weeks ago. We are closing in the GA. GA means general availability. It doesn't mean that the GA will happen within weeks. It will happen, however, relatively soon. So the changes on the framework, well, you will see less and less changes on the upcoming drops, which means that we're heading closer and closer to the moment when we're going to release the SharePoint framework, the client-side web parts for general availability. And just to kind of clarify that one, so SharePoint framework is much more than just the client-side web parts, but it's really around the UX. So how do we actually customize the SharePoint using the modern techniques? SharePoint framework does not include, for example, branding. Branding will be dealt using, let's say, alternative approaches, which we will announce later on whenever the timing is right. But SharePoint framework will have the client-side web parts. There's additional components coming up on that one as well in the future. And right now we're looking into having a GA on the client-side web parts whenever we are ready with that. But anyway, there will be a few drops before that one as well. The key point of that one is that if you start implementing something right now, there will be less and less changes within your code needed whenever we will do a new release. There's some new guidance. There's a new guidance section introduced within the dev.office.com/SharePoint with 3 initial articles, and those are around using or building client-side web parts with Angular 1.x, because we know that Angular is quite popular within the community as well. Even though in Microsoft we use React, but it's up to you which library you actually want to use. We also have an article on using existing JavaScript libraries on SharePoint framework client-side web parts. So how do you actually associate those libraries? What are the impact and what kind of libraries are available? Because depending on a library type, there's certain differences on that. And then the third one is calling a Microsoft Graph API from client-side web part. So what does it actually mean? What's the current status around that one? Because right now that requires an additional authentication because the SharePoint is not using the exact same authentication scheme as Azure AD. We're looking into changing that and we're looking into making that integration much more seamless by the time of GA. Let's see if we can get it for the GA as well. Seems to be that there's still some texts which are hidden. So the SharePoint Framework web part sample repository is growing fast. There's now 6 pending pull requests, which I'm looking into. I've been actually prioritizing this bot framework thingy for this week, and unfortunately there's small changes which I still want to get through on that one. The initial sample was done by Gary Preedy, who's in the call as well, but he has a relatively lousy connection, so we agreed that I'll do the demo and I can explain what's actually happening. So what I want to do with that one is just to have slightly more additional guidance and references so people know how to repeat the demo which I'm going to do today, because that's actually super interesting. And there's multiple other new samples and webcasts available. And I think I'm actually listing all of the existing samples which are already approved, and they are available within the GitHub for you to start consuming. So this is the list of things. So the new ones are the first one, as an example, Angular migration, which is a new sample around if I have an existing Angular application, how do I actually get that one running in the client-side web parts? Because the amount of work is not that not that difficult. And then there's a, let's see if I can pinpoint that, React custom property pane controls is a relatively simple sample, a great window from Waldeck around how do I build a custom property pane controls, kind of specifically showing how to do that in a one specific sample. Like mentioned, there's quite a few samples pending the final verification, and I'm looking into them still today and tomorrow, and most likely some of them will go through until next week. But we're absolutely looking into having more and more those samples available. And there is Kevin is sharing some of his stuff as well. And obviously, if Kevin, if you're interested, we're more than interested on getting those samples in the main repo or the SharePoint sample repo as well. You can absolutely keep them within your own GitHub. If you want them to get listed, however, in the dev.ops.com as available samples, we would want to have a version in our GitHub as a pull request, because then we can guarantee that the sample exists. Because if the sample is in an external GitHub, we don't know if the sample is going to be deleted. And after a while, there will be such a big amount of samples that we can't actually do checking of all of them all the time. So that's really the reason why we're collecting these to one location. On the web videos and webcast sites, there's a lot of stuff available already, and these are really meant to be relatively simplistic, so that they will help you to get started on the SharePoint framework. There is a learning curve if you haven't done this in the past, but it's not really that significant. I think the number one thing to remember is that yes, accept the change and accept the fact that, hey, this is where we're heading. And after that, you are in a much more better position to learn the things. At least, even personally, I'm a really kind of a veteran in SharePoint. I've been doing farm solutions since the early dawn of 2006, whenever we got a beta version of 2007 SharePoint. And it took a while, no doubt, to learn the new ways of doing customizations. But this is where the whole community and industry is heading. And we want to make sure that if you are a SharePoint developer, you will actually learn how to do this modern way of doing development. And after that, it's not that you're any longer just a SharePoint developer, you are actually a web developer as well, because this is where the industry is heading as a whole. Yes, Reuters. Sorry, Patrick. That was when dinosaurs walked on Earth. It's actually it's mind blowing that I've been 10 years in Microsoft, but that's a completely different discussion. Patrick, you want to do a quick intro on the status on the PnP.js core component and explain just briefly what it is, and then we'll do some demos. And Jax is joining on the call as well, so good to see that he was able to wake up. But Patrick, take it away.
Thanks, Vesa, for those great updates. And so we'll do a quick update on what's going on with the JS core component. A couple links down there at the bottom. We'll talk about this in a second, but we've actually transitioned or transferred the repo ownership from Office Dev to SharePoint. So you'll see github.com/SharePoint PnP.js core, and then we've got the npm package and as well the getter. And as best I can tell, the getter URL doesn't change. I'm still sort of trying to figure that out. Thank you as always to our contributors. Nobody new this week, but thanks as always to everybody that's contributed in the past. And we're always looking for folks who are interested in contributing in the future. And small and large contributions are always very much appreciated. So thank you again to everybody that's contributed. So what's been happening? The first thing is we moved the repo underneath the SharePoint organization. So it's kind of a big move in terms of internal Microsoft stuff. We're now part of kind of the SharePoint program a little bit more, which is really exciting. It makes us a little bit closer to what's going on with the SharePoint framework. Again, absolutely not required to use with the SharePoint framework, but hopefully this will get a little bit more visibility for the library and get folks a way to use it and be a little more familiar with it as it becomes a little bit more officially part of kind of the SharePoint organization. So everything in terms of your clones and forks and all the GitHub stuff should work as before. I've been using it now. We actually moved it last week. So everything's been working fine for me. If you do have any trouble related to that, please let me know. But also, when you get a chance, if you're not currently doing any work or have any uncommitted work, they do recommend, when we were reading about transferring this, to re-clone and re-fork from the new URL when you get a chance. But if you have existing work you're doing, you should be able to commit that and create a pull request with absolutely no problem. I've done it a few times, and I think Basis tested it as well. So that all seems to be working just fine. But
and Patrick, just on that note, just to elaborate that slightly. So, like Patrick mentioned, just repeating what you were saying, just making sure that everybody got it. So, even though we moved the repository, and by the way, we might be actually moving the other PnP repos as well to the SharePoint organization if this goes well. It's actually mind-blowing that even though people have forked and pulled down the things, everything works, even though the location, the URL of the repo is completely different. So the GitHub guys have done an awesome job of making the movement and transforming or transferring the repo to a new location completely seamless. It's really, really great. But yeah, sorry to interrupt.
It's been really impressive how smoothly it's worked to date.
Yeah.
So, but just wanted to give everybody a heads up that has happened. So if you look up at the URL, you should get automatically redirected. Don't worry, that is correct. But it is an exciting move because it does move us a little bit more towards the SharePoint organization, which you'll see in that second point. And so it's great visibility for all of us who've been working on the JS core, and as well as acknowledgement of the great work done by everybody here in the community that's contributed. It's really a great recognition. So again, thanks to everybody that's contributed, and we are starting to get a little bit of notice from folks sort of on the engineering side for the work everybody's done. So thank you, and let's keep it up. So that's great stuff. We did want to bring up, we're getting a lot of issues, not a lot, but we're getting issues being reported. So I want to say thank you for that. It's always great to get those in so we can get them fixed. So I've got enough stuff. We'll look at probably doing a 1.0.6 release maybe next week if there's a few other issues I want to get fixed before that. One reminder, when you submit an issue, please include enough information that somebody with no context can understand what you were doing. I know sometimes if you've been working on something for a few hours or a few days, your head and your mind is deep into it. But for those of us that read those issue tickets, we haven't, unfortunately, been working on the same problem for however long. So please include enough information as well as accurate information in terms of list titles or settings. For example, if you've switched over to use the OData verbose, for example, details like that really help us reproduce and fix issues. So the more information we have, the faster we can address the issues. So, but thank you everybody that's been reporting issues. It just makes the library better for everybody. So I've had a fair amount of time over the last week, which has been kind of nice. So we've got get and set of file contents, some new support for that, and a lot of improvements. Plus, I've added easy support for chunked uploading of large files. So you can upload up to 2 gigs over the REST API, but it's still subject to timeouts. So chunking those uploads is a way to kind of help manage that. And so you can take a look at that, and that'll be that's in the dev branch now, and that'll be written up as part of the release notes for 1.06 whenever that goes out. But so that should hopefully be another nice improvement for the community. We've also got some bugs that have come in, have gotten fixed, and we've got some additional enhancements. Just added some stuff yesterday for the search suggest API, so that'll be part of 1.06 release. And then did want to just offer out again, if you have an idea or see an issue, you can always fix it and submit a pull request. That is always a great way to get stuff you want into the library or get bugs fixed a little quicker, depending on how busy the core team is. Because generally we are working on this stuff in our spare time, as a rule. Though, like I said, this week I've had a little bit more time to work on some stuff. So pull requests always very welcome. If you have questions or aren't sure if an enhancement you want to write is appropriate, just get in touch on Gitter or the Microsoft Tech community, or submit an issue, and we're happy to talk through that and discuss that with you. And the last point I think is really exciting. We've had over 1 million requests in the last month. So the month of October, we're already over 1 million requests have come into SharePoint Online from the JS Core library. So I think that's a really exciting milestone. We're not quite caught up to the CSOM core, which I think is almost to 1 billion requests a month, but we'll get there. But it's really cool to see the actual usage going up each month of the library, and I think it's another great testament to the great work everybody here in the community has done to that end. So SharePoint community, link at the bottom, as well as the Gitter, great places to get in touch, ask questions, and things like that. Opportunities to contribute, unchanged. As always, I'll just highlight, if you write a web part and would like to show it off on this call, open invitation to do that. So when just get in touch with myself or Vesa via Gitter or the tech community, and we can look at getting things set up in terms of getting you on a demo. So would love to show off, as always, the work the community is doing. And then those other points on opportunities to contribute haven't really changed. So we'll move on into some demos. So Chax is on the call. Chax, are you ready to fire off your demo?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm still setting up my machine.
So I can do a demo first, so that's fine. So
Excellent.
we can do the bot thingy, so don't worry about it. It's pretty early morning for you, so let me just quickly copy-paste.
And meanwhile, I'll get ready.
Cool. So our first demo will be bots with the SharePoint framework. So Vesa and Gary. Is Gary on the call? I'm going to elevate Gary to a presenter.
So I'm going to do the presentation. Gary's on the call, and he can answer. Well, if the audio works, he can talk. If there's any questions, or we can use an ion window. But I'm going to pinpoint. No mic for Gary. Okay. So I'm going to pinpoint Gary in the presentation as well. So let's actually get started. Dun, 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 dun. So tell me when the sharing works. I'm running the latest dog food version of the Skype for Business, so let's see if everything works fine.
We've got your desktop.
Excellent. That was super fast. So that's a surprise even. Cool. So just to make sure that people understand this, so this isn't something what I've actually created. This is created by Gary Pretty. Gary is on the call as well, but like mentioned, Gary doesn't have a microphone. Here's Gary's blog. So there's the www.GaryPretty.co UK, and Gary has actually written quite a lot of stuff on the Microsoft Bot framework. And based on all of this stuff, on getting started and all of that stuff, he also submitted a pull request, which actually is showing how to do a client-side web part, which is talking to a bot created using the Microsoft Bot network. So briefly explaining what how this actually works is that I'm going to pinpoint you for the resources first. So the bot framework is something which you can find more information. That's actually not the main URL. Let me go there. dev.botframework.com, and this is our bot framework coming from Microsoft, which has a lot of benefits. So it's actually helping you to get started. There's a Visual Studio template to get started, which works as such. And Gary has a great blog post, or in the documentation section in here, there's the steps how to actually get started on the things. So what I've done is that I first created a Visual Studio project based on the bot framework template. So I'm going to actually quickly show that. So there's the bot application template. There's instructions in the internet how to actually get that one available within your machine. It's a downloadable zip, and you put it in the right location, and that's fine. Actual bots are essentially web APIs. They do have a lot of additional benefits. They do have a lot of additional components and framework and all of that which you can use. And this is as simple bot as possible. I slightly modified the template, but I'll show this one in practice as well. So this is my bot now running locally, and as part of the bot framework, I can actually test the bot using a channel emulator, which means that as long as I'm running against the right API on my local host, I can actually do something like, hello there, and I can test that everything works fine. I can see what's being sent to my bot, and then the bot will reply in a second. The initial reply takes slightly longer, but then it's really, really fast as done. And in this case, it's essentially showing or replying random texts. I was looking into building kind of I used to, well, everybody, well, at least the dinosaurs have played with Commodore 64 back in the 80s, and there was these text-based machines or games. So I was just doing a random text messaging. So now I can have my personal discussion with this bot, and it's always responding back a random text. So what it's actually doing, just quickly showing that from a code, it's a web API, and what it actually does is that I have a set of messages which is randomly actually replying back, and that's it. So it doesn't actually do that much more right now, but we can further extend the sample to do actually whatever you like. There's a massive amount of scenarios. You can include machine learning, you can include additional intelligence, you can include all of these goodies around the bot framework and the language detections and all of that which are available for people to consume. So I have my bot available. I've actually deployed this already to Microsoft Azure, which is one of the requirements, and all of this will be referenced in the README, how to get actually started, and I'm going to share this code for the bot as well. And after that, what I've done is that I've registered the bot in the bot framework, and there's my PnP test reply bot. And in my case, I've actually registered that to direct line, which is needed for the client-side web part, but also for Skype. So after configuring this, I can actually use my Skype to test that everything is okay, and I can have a chat with my bot, my PnP bot, which is responding back something completely random. I've been having my personal individual discussions with the bot lately, as you can see, testing it, and it's always responding something back. It's nice to have at least a bot to discuss if you don't have any friends. And that was a joke. I know my stand-up comedy isn't always that good. Cool. So I have the bot. I've tested that in Skype. I've tested that in localhost. Everything is working. And now it's just a matter of actually using that within the client-side web part. So let's actually first have a look on using that. So, it's not actually that window. I'm going to actually take that one window in here. So what I've done is that I pulled down the sample. And the sample itself, I've done npm install, and after that, it's pretty much ready to go. So I can actually do carp serve. As long as my bot has been deployed, I can actually then configure this web part to talk against my bot. And I'm going to do a carp serve, which will then start the web part. And let's quickly have a look on the code after this one as well. And there's my local SharePoint workbench. Doesn't really matter. It works obviously in the context of SharePoint as well. There's my chat client, and I need to do a connection. So obviously I need to tell that this chat window, where's my bot? And we're going to use a direct line secret option with that one, which is one of the settings within the bot itself. So the channel for the bot is direct line. And essentially what it means is that I have a secret which will actually tell which of the bot is the one which we communicate against. So let me copy the secret completely. There we go. Moving back on the client-side web part and moving along. It's a reactive change, so that modification has been already committed because we don't have an apply button in here. And after that, if everything goes well, I can actually start talking to myself. Anyone there? And after a while, we will have a response. And then I can have a infinite discussion with this bot. Oh, you are repeating But now, right now it's a really simplistic example. It really just takes a random string from the collection of strings, so it doesn't do anything intelligent. But we were already kind of started speculating all of the things which we could do here, which is like you can actually ask questions. You can ask that, hey, I need to find a certain document, and we could do a SharePoint search operation from the web API towards the SharePoint Online. We could do even on-premises connectivity using all of the Azure things. What's really kind of the key point, at least for me, as a classic enterprise developer, I used to be a principal consultant in services, is that this actually gives me an opportunity and channel to talk outside of the SharePoint as well. Because every single command, which I'm actually doing in here, no, you can't have. So every single command that I'm doing here is actually transformed and executed against the web API. And that secret is kind of making the channel secure. Well, just multiple considerations on that one. But after I'm executing that, stuff is executed within my web API. And when I'm in my web API, I have power and access to all of the services within the Microsoft Azure, which means that I can do service bus, I can do machine learning, I can do whatever I want after these commands, whatever the person is actually sending. I can request a new meeting to be created to my, let's say, Microsoft Graph, or using the Microsoft Graph APIs, by using this, what was the right term, the chat-based UI. There was a nice terminology explained in the bot framework model. And this goes up to the level, let's go in here. So you're able to actually create also these panels. I'm not sure, obviously from a bot framework perspective you can do this, then it's a matter of making sure that the client which you're using is capable of rendering that properly. But that's a really good example. So I want to have a haircut on Saturday. I have these times available, 10:30 a.m. Okay, is that correct? And then the person answers, yep, that's correct. And voila, we have a reservation or an invite sent or whatever we want to do within the flow. Quickly having a look on the combine inside Delve. Yes, that's a good comment from Rolf, because then you're able to ask information and API. Well, there's some massive and awesome information in the Delve and Office Graph. Well, regardless if you're accessing that using Microsoft Graph or Office Graph, and then you're able to access information and all of that. So from a development perspective, so let's have a look on the implementation itself. So this is a React-based. So Gary implemented this as a React-based web part. So it's quite simple. I personally actually like React a lot for the simplicity of the implementation as well. So this is the actual web part file. Let me slightly zoom that bigger. And we can see from the web part definition over the web part implementation that the only thing what we're doing is that we're actually creating this React element, which is the bot framework chat. And then we're rendering that using the React DOM render. So that's the React base of doing stuff. And we are bypassing the individual properties which people can configure within the property, through the web part property settings or the property pane in the UI. And then we only have the property pane settings available. What do we want to actually have as configurable values? The actual implementation is in the bot framework chat, is this bot framework chat, and this is actually quite relatively simple as well. So what the bot framework is providing, or what has been done in here, is that the Swagger framework has been used to create a JSON file, or the JSON definition of the endpoint, which is essentially a description of the REST API available within the bot framework. And after that's available and done, it's just a matter of doing a connection. So we're connecting to the actual bot framework. and then we start a framework, a new conversation, and we set up certain other properties. The actual UI itself is rendered in the render method of the React component, like it is always in React components. So we have the styling and the divs, and then inside of here we can actually see, for example, the get messages HTML function, which is actually responsible of getting the messages from the bot framework. And where's my get messages HTML? Where do we actually get? There's the poll messages where we're actually polling messages for the conversation ID, and we're using again the Swagger, the client created by Swagger. So there's a get messages method. We're getting a collection of messages, and we're just rendering that in a loop for the page itself. But it's actually surprisingly small amount of code. There's the printing of messages where we actually render the message itself out from the UI perspective. Relatively small amount of code, and it's a one React component connecting to the bot framework, and we can actually have all of the needed intelligence then on the web API side. And this is also, at least for me and actually for everybody else, a good reminder that the SharePoint framework is not just about the UI. It's really about combining the UI elements, which is the client-side web part, and whatever you want on the server side, because if you need to break through just from a UI perspective, you can always implement a web API and call that, and then behind of the web API we can do whatever is needed, connect to a SQL Server database, connect to on-premises, connect to or use bot framework, and so on. So really great demo on making this happen. But I don't want to eat too much more time on this one, because I know that Jax has a lot to talk about as well. Let's see if we will schedule a webcast recording with Gary around this one, so talk about the actual things in a more detailed. So how did we do this? But let's actually, for today and for this recording, let's actually switch to Jax, if you are, Jax, ready with the setup.
Thanks, Mr. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, all good.
Excellent. So I'm going to share my screen.
And by the way, it's kind of ironic that we are showing a React implementation in here, which isn't quite following up on the models what Jax is going to show in a second, which is the good practices of React implementation. But let's talk about that one while Jax goes and shows the stuff. If the sharing will start. There we go. Now it's actually taking over at least my page or my screen.
So can you guys see the workbench?
Yes, all good.
Excellent. So one of the things I have been working on is basically trying to give a sample that can, keep growing with the framework releases and showing all the framework capabilities and the things that we do inside Microsoft of, building a first-party web part, what would we care about and how would we go with that. So I took that challenge and basically started working on a very simple, useful or not useful sample, but it actually takes you through the different aspects of the framework and shows you how to use certain capabilities. Now, of course, this is in Angular. This is in React. When Angular 2 is ready, I think I will also try to build this in Angular 2, but right now I have it in React. So basically what this sample does. Well, let me show you the sample first, so then we can dig through the code and what it does. So here's in my local workbench, I have my to-do web part. As soon as I do, did you see how it actually had a, if you notice, there was a spinning indicator, and then we got a placeholder. So basically, it gives you an idea of, oh, I can actually have something telling the user that I'm still loading this web part. And then since I haven't configured it, and this is the first time I'm dropping this web part into my page, I have an experience where I can give some icon, a title, and description of what to do. And then instead of, basically telling the user to go click this pencil icon, you can have a direct configure button that opens the property pane. So it's kind of a very good user experience, and you will see this experience across various first-party web parts we have today in the first release if you happen to get them. And then you have the basic thing, what's the list you want to select to map your to-dos. So I say list 1. Now I get certain items from list 1, which is, of course, this is running in my local, so it's mock data. And you can see already I have certain things selected. And if I switch to list 2, I get the new data. If I list to list 3, I don't have anything. And again, similarly, like any to-do web part, I can do this. I can basically now preview the page, and I can have everything interacting just like I would like it to interact on a SharePoint site. So this is the workbench in the local demo. And I also have it here in my SharePoint site. Now in my SharePoint site, you can see I already have a list called team task. And basically if I go here now, and of course I see my other web parts, I click my to-do, so you saw the same experience here. It did take some little bit time, so the loading indicator was there, but still again, now it's actually saying, oh, you haven't done any configure your web part yet, why don't you configure it? And now I actually get only my SharePoint list in my SharePoint site. So now I do that, and actually this is coming from the list items in the theme task list. So I can go and basically do this, and it's going to go back to the server, come back, and then basically say, yep, everything was successful. I'm going to basically check your item. Or I can uncheck them. Or I can now add a new item. So this is basically the demo. And of course, you can go to the mobile. Now here's a bug. Click preview, because we don't have mobile yet for editing. And you can see that it is actually responsive. So this sample also makes sure that you're building a responsive web part. And if you go to Galaxy S7, iPhone 6 Plus, Lumia, so everything, it's basically you get a much nicer one. The other thing also I have is it's actually accessible. So you can see that I'm actually moving here in my cursor in my keyboard, and you can see how it highlights the different area. And if I'm here and I press enter, it's actually going to delete that. So it's really accessible, it's mobile, and it gives you all the key things that you want to look at on how to build a good web part. And guess what? The other thing we can do is we can basically go here, and let me delete this list from the site. So now, actually, I don't have any list. So this is one of the other things that people have, a lot of people discuss about, say, hey, now I'm, fetching a list template, list instances of list template type task. Now I don't have anything in my site. How should my web part respond, or how should my web part behave? Now, of course, there are various ways to solve this problem, right? But this sample shows one of the ways where I add my to-do, I still get the placeholder, but when I configure now, I actually give a message saying, hey, could not find task list in your site, create one or more task lists, and then try using the web part. Now, once the reason why we can't create a list along with this, which many people would think, hey, why don't we just create a list here? Because the creation of list in SharePoint requires specific permission sets, right? So we may not know whether the user using this, authoring this page has the right permissions to go create a list. The other method that you can do is deploy this list along your web part. That's something I'm working on. So then what happens is if you deploy this web part and add it to your site, just like how you include list templates and stuff, we will include the same list template and list instances in our web part solution file, and then that will provision the web list along with when you add the web part. But that's a little bit complex, and if you see our first-party web parts, you will see a very similar experience. Now, as we improve the provisioning story and work with the provisioning engine, you will see us have a much better story in that scenario later when we improve that. But right now, some choices are here, and we should choose those. And I chose this one where I say, hey, you have to go create a list and then come back here, and then it'll be much smoother because someone has to go create and manage those lists. Now, let's be very honest. In SharePoint, there's sometimes a lot of lists created and not managed. So that's the reason why I'm not actually doing anything but letting people know there needs to happen something. So let's delegate that operation to the people responsible to manage that. So that's the demo. Now let's look at the code. So if you go to GitHub, let me open the tab. Yeah, so if you go to GitHub, SharePoint, SPFx web parts, under samples, you will see React to do basic. So there is already a web part React to do. Now that's something that we started initially, but I don't feel like it does capture a lot of things. Like it goes beyond this web part. It has user profile and many other things, but the coding pattern is a little bit different. So I'm working to change that coding pattern to the same pattern I have it in the basic web part. But basic is a stripped down, a much stripped down version of React to do user experience. So it helps you to kickstart your web part development in React. So the React to do basic, the README file basically talks you through the most of the things we have here. But let me just go through that. So the first thing is, I'm not sure how many have or know React, but if you're not familiar with it, let me just check the, excellent. But if you're not familiar with it, I would highly encourage you to go to the Facebook GitHub IO React and then start with the Hello World sample. They have a pretty good documentation, and we have learned a lot from that documentation as well. I mean, if you see us putting documentation on SPFx, it's like, gather all these good documentation, how they help you learn things, and then basically apply that for the web parts as well. So let me move. So there are various React patterns available. So I have linked here where you can go look at, and basically I'm using the container component. In a minute I'll explain what that is. But the component model really helps you stay focused and build web parts really easily. Now, this is exactly a very similar pattern how Angular 2 is also Nostra has been coming up with the Angular 2 components and how you build it with an Angular app. So this, your knowledge here doesn't just stay with React. It also will apply, how you build Angular 2 and other things going forward, because componentization is a very important concept nowadays in the web. So basically what I do is I have a component file. If you are into React, you know that there is two big things in React, which is props and state. State is something that manages the rendering of the component. Props is something just like properties that you pass on to render the component. And then finally the Sass file, which is what we use for our CSS markup and styles. And we make sure that the React stuff is with React and the web part stuff is with web part, because this is very important when you're building a web part, right? You're a developer and you want to make sure the code that you write is manageable. And even after 6 months, you open up the project, you should be very easy to go and look at, oh, okay, so what is happening here, and debug anything that you want to. So there's really, I put I think I'm very comfortable in saying that I landed up in a very good pattern that I feel comfortable even after 6 months or a year you open and it's very clear on what things are. And then this is the status window as I was talking about. You have a loading indicator and an error indicator in the framework that you can use directly. This is we can see it in the code later. And the placeholder. Placeholder today is a React component available in the framework. Unfortunately, we don't have one for Angular 2 or any other framework, but the concept to you is open, so you can basically have your own UX as well presented here, because some webparts need that, right? Some ISVs or some companies may have their own set of representation of what needs to be represented if the webpart has no information. So we have given, it's just a if-else condition if you see in the code to understand how we do that. And then Lodash utility library. So that's again another biggest utility library that you may not be familiar with, but I would highly encourage you to be familiar with. A lot of operations like manipulating array string numbers can be done using Lodash, and it's a huge library outside. So we made sure that we take this specific things and bring it to you through the Microsoft Lodash subset package. So then you can do some operations. I'm using find index, find the index in the array and stuff like that. The page display mode is another key thing. So we have the page display mode read and write, right? So in the classic SharePoint world, when you edit a page, the page is in edit mode, but the web part is still in read mode, if you remember correctly. So how do you handle that situation? Well, we can check that and make sure that we give a different placeholder, right? So here in the screenshot, you can see that if page is in edit mode, but the web part is not, then I give a different placeholder here saying that, hey, edit this web part to start managing to-dos. Now, as soon as I edit the web part, which in the old world, you have to click the drop down and say edit web part, it goes, the page is in edit mode and it's also the web part. So basically now you can say, oh, now I can actually display the actual placeholder where I can click configure and have it work through the saving the configuring the web part. And then finally, how do you load the SharePoint data? So you saw me loading the list of lists, SharePoint list in the drop down, and this is one of the ways we have here. Now I'm not using any custom control, and that's the whole point, right? I don't want to use custom control. I want to use the framework capabilities. So with respect to drop 5, this is what we have. And this scenario, to support this scenario, we have more improvements in the later drops, and you can see the sample updated to that when it gets released. And then the handling empty data. So what do I do for handling the empty data in the property pane? So the sample is really big. I mean, really big in terms of showing you what capabilities and things that you want to use. And then we go with the data providers, showing you the mock data provider, SharePoint data provider, how do you use that. And then basically we have a HTTP client. Now this is very important. Many samples may use the normal HTTP client, the web HTTP client, to go fetch data and construct the header and all those things, right? But the framework has an HTTP client object that basically you can use to go call SharePoint items. Or in the future, if we enable graph support or any other thing, we will make sure the HTTP client in the framework is able to take your request, add all the necessary headers or context, and basically help you just focus on what is the API call you want to do. So how do you use that HTTP client in the SharePoint framework, as well as how do you use batching? Because batching is very important, right? Here in this scenario, every time I do something, I change the data set, for a reason, go and fetch the entire data set back, just to show the fact that I have batching and things like that in this very small sample. Now, in the bigger sample, this could be in many different areas in your code, but it shows that the HTTP client is capable of handling batch requests and things like that. And you can see that I basically, if you see the code, let me go through the code as well. I'm not doing anything different other than constructing my query URL and then basically saying requester.get query URL. I'm not even doing any headers or context, nothing, because HTTP client takes care of that for me. And yeah, so those are the features that we have here, and we are, this sample is well guarded from the product team. Like the web part dev that I work, my dev lead in web part, we sit together and make sure we're doing the right set of things here. Are we having the entire, the things that we want to talk about, and it's being run through the all the tests that every time something changes, we come and check to make sure this web part is up to date. So it's a lot of effort is given to make sure that this web part is going to stay up to date. Now, going back to the code, I would just want to check my time. Vesa, how much time do we have, or how much time do I have?
Well, 4 minutes. We're going to close up after the demo anyway, so.
Okay. So I think Vesa was also planning for a separate to-do webcast, if possible, if people want to know. So we can do that as well. But quickly going through the code, you can see that here's my web part. I have the same, models and stuff like that. And here's my to-do web part. And then if you notice, I have components. And then under components, I have broken down my sample into different components. Now I'm following the container pattern, so I have a dummy, I have a container, and then the rest of the stuff is dummy components. And you can see here for each component, I have basically structured that, hey, if you want to look at the CSS for that component, here it is. If you want to look at the CSS for another component, say to-do form, well, that it is here, right? It's really structured. It makes it easy to look into this code. And that's the power of React here. It helps you to focus on one thing that container does. And that's very important. You have to, don't feel ashamed to to have 10 components or 20 components. It's really good. The more you break your components down and make your components just do one thing, that is what React wants you to do, because then you have control over the rendering, control over the state, and you get the most optimized performance you want. Like you will be pushed to build an optimized React app or component. And then basically here, there's a lot of patterns followed here. There's a React, two things I will tell about the lifecycle methods. So every time you basically go to your web part, and there's an on-property change method that basically says, oh, somebody selected a list, and I want to now render the new list, items in the new list, right? So whenever you do that, basically what I do is the property pane changes that and basically issues a re-rendering. So when you re-render in React, it doesn't know that, oh, something has changed, I need to go re-render. And for that, we basically have component will receive props. And if you, this is in the sample, so you'll, when you look at it, you'll understand where the code is. But basically, these are some nuances that you need to know in React. Now we can go deeper when we have a separate webcast, but basically here is one nuance. And the other thing that many people miss, and even I missed during my initial thing, is I try to render the entire. Where is that? I should have. Oh, somehow I don't seem to have the latest one. Hang on. Let me go to the fork repo. I don't see it here too. I don't know why. So yeah, so we can talk that later. But basically the code structure you see here is very divided into different things. Now the key thing, another thing that I want to talk about is the mock data provider and SharePoint data provider, right? So whenever you are in the local environment, we need to make sure we have mock data provider. And if not, we actually need to create the SharePoint data provider. And basically, you also need to pass the web part context, because the context is where you have all of the other things like page mode and all those stuff. Now, some may ask, is it okay for me to pass this context into the data provider? It's absolutely okay. What is not okay is don't keep passing the properties of the web part to all the containers, right? Make sure that you divide them into different things based on the component, what it needs. For example, in my the React element, I need my data provider, I need the display mode, and I need the callback on property pane for the button or something like that, right? So I'm not passing the entire property back of the web part, but I'm actually passing what I need here into the React component. Now, if you see, I'm actually initializing my data provider and passing the data provider object, because I don't want to go and recreate all this data provider. I already know in my web part where I am, and that's it. As long as I do that, I can send that to my data provider. And if you see here in my data provider, so this is my SharePoint data provider. I have getters and setters. Now this is again something. Look in the code. It's really like the code itself is built in such a way that it's something what you write C#, right? You have getters and setters. I exactly have getters and setters, and I made sure that this code is well readable as well. So it helps you understand some of the TypeScript concepts we use as well with the code. Yeah. So then we have mock data provider here that basically has an array of array, and then gives you back the list items that you saw. That's probably the sample. I'll update the sample with localization as well very soon. I'll update it unit test as well very soon. So there are a lot of updates for the sample that is pending, and will be giving more as we move to GA. Well, that's me. That's a lot of stuff, but if you want a specific webcast for this, Vesa and I are more than happy to talk about it.
Great stuff. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Vesa. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Chax, for those great demos. We'll get the links and stuff out. They've been pasted as well in the IM window. One of the things I did want to mention again that the to-do web part really shows is the importance of remembering things like accessibility and good styling. Stuff like that really is a big important focus for us at Microsoft, and would encourage everybody to remember those principles in your web parts and your development as well. Unfortunately, we don't have much time for Q&A. In fact, no time. Our next meeting will be November 10th. Want to thank everybody for attending, and we'll get the video out hopefully later today or early tomorrow. So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate the great demos. Really appreciate everybody joining, and great to see so much interest in the community. Have a great rest of your week. Thanks.